Welcome to Sight, Sound, and Story Live Behind the Lens, capturing horror films. I'm Josh Apter. Our panelists tonight are cinematographer Oona Menges and Charlie Sarroff, and our moderator is Chad the Ghoul Anderson. Horror films depend on the cinematographer to create the compositions, tone, mood, and surreal imagery that scare the crap out of us and keep us on the edge of our seats. Just in time for Halloween, join us for a special conversation with cinematographers Charlie Sarroff and Oona Menges as they discuss their approach to capturing horror and suspense. Charlie's latest work can be seen in the recently released traumatic horror Smile, directed by Parker Finn, and Oona's work in the genre can be seen in The Host, directed by Andy Newbery. Moderator Chad Anderson will guide the discussion and show examples of their work before he scares you to death. By the way, someone was in the house with Oona and she lost power. She managed to get a hotspot, but we will note at one point that something strange happens. Thank you to OWC, AJA, Zeist, Filmmaker U, Janet Dalton, and Jason Benke, without whom none of this fun could ever happen. So sit back, relax, and have a spooky good time.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sight, Sound, and Story. We are going to talk about the art of cinematography. We have two exciting, fantastic guests for us. Cinematographers Charlie Saroff, who is Melbourne-born from Australia, now living in Los Angeles. He has worked on a number of films and television shows, and most recently has worked on the terrifyingly scary movie that I just saw, Smile, which gave me nightmares because I'm a bit of a wimp about that. And he's also worked on The Relic, as well as a number of other projects in documentary, in film, in television, etc. And also Oona Menges is coming to us from London, and she has worked on the noir almost style film The Host, as well as a number of other projects, including Dirty Pretty Things. And she's worked in the camera departments as well as being a DP herself. We're excited to have both of them. This particular Sight, Sound, and Story presentation is going to be talking about cinematography, talking about cameras, talking about lenses, talking about the image, talking about how things look and how cinematographers work. But also, since it is October, we are going to be talking about scary movies. So we are going to take a look at the trailers from Smile. We're going to take a look at the trailer from The Host, and we're going to talk about working in the genre of horror as a cinematographer, which is kind of exciting because there's some interesting and playful things we can do with horror and the image. So I'm going to say thank you to both my guests for being here today, Charlie and Oona. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here and participating in this event. We're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Great.
Nice to meet you.
So I guess, my foremost question, my introductory question really is, since this is, it is the Halloween time, it is October, and we're, my children are starting to dress up as scary things and trying to scare each other. In terms of approaching horror movies and thriller movies, when you think about the image and you think about the look and you think about the style and the approach, everything from how the camera moves to how the image is composed, are there things you work through to kind of get a sense of scary, to approach fear or, distress in your creation or your composition of your image? Charlie, I'll start with you, if I may.
Yeah, sure. No, good question. I think whether you're shooting a horror, a drama, or a comedy, I feel like the approach can be quite similar from project to project. It's just about breaking it down and finding like what is the essence of what we need to tell scene by scene, and then what is the overarching story, and where do we begin and where do we end, and then just trying to figure out the language and all the little elements along the way to provoke whatever feeling it is. And in the terms of horror, things that come to mind is like what do we want the audience to see in that moment? What do we not want them to see? And then what tools can be used for that? Like, is it light, shadow, is different type of lensing, figuring out the pace, like at what moment do we want some sort of a scare to happen, or do we want the audience to feel like there's a scare coming but it isn't? And it's just really working things like that out with the director and other departments. So like in terms of there being like a specific thing with horror, like I think, yeah, sure, that's you are playing with pacing a lot, and it's really talking that out. And whether it's, you know, in pre-production or even in pre-pre, you know, where it's just the director and yourself sitting there scribbling notes down and trying to figure out, okay, you know, the camera's in this position at that point, but then we pan around to reveal something. Like all of that sort of stuff happens in prep. And again, I think it is similar for other genres as well, because you do also want to try and, you know, purvey those feelings in different ways for different things. But so yeah, but you know, bringing it back to horror, like light and shadow is a huge part of it, and figuring out where that's going to be, you know, once you've seen the locations or built them, and you know, and pacing, and a lot of that is the editor as well. Like the director and the editor will be there after the fact, and they will also, you'll shoot things in a certain way quite often where you have pacing in mind, and then you get to see a cut and you're like, whoa, you know, that's, I have to give a lot of credit to the editor and the director sitting there with them, like as well. Like they might come up with something new that we've shot from a different angle, and they've put it in at a point where you're like, you know, bravo, like, you know, that it's collaboration. But as far as I think that, you know, hopefully that kind of answers your question. It's really just prep and discussions, and you know, working out, like, you know, lensing is a huge part of it. You know, is like you're going to have a different feeling going telephoto to being like wide and close. And I know the horror films I've done, we've usually opted for wider lenses, and then, you know, in order to be able to like have an impact at a certain point, you might change that up and go telephoto for like 1 or 2 times throughout the film. So it's figuring out those sorts of beats, I guess. And then, yeah, and back to lighting again, that's a huge part of it. Like, is color going to provoke some sort of a feeling? Is it like, you know, is there a certain color that means something? Or, you know, how dark do we want to let things go? Sometimes being really bright is just as scary, like, just as scary, and allowing, you know, you know, a lot in, and having the audience feel very vulnerable, because it's, you know, it's the sort of environment it is. You can kind of contradict it. Finding those contradictions is important as well. So lots of different tools. I don't know if there's like a one size fits all approach to it, but these are all things you think about when you go in. So
following up on that, do you sense that when you're in production and you're doing it, and you do a take and you have a shot, can you sense it? Can you sense like, oh, that's going to be scary? Like, that's going to be like, are there moments there that you're like, I got it?
Sometimes, especially with the jump scary stuff, you know, when all of the crew are sitting around monitors and they scream and laugh, and you know when you got it, then you might be like playback, and then something happens. Like, you know, I know in Smile there's the case of Sosie Bacon, who plays Rose, is, you know, she's at the laptop and she leans back, and you know, there's a figure there and things like that. Had to do that a few times, obviously, to get the timing right. But when it works and you play back and you've got, you know, different departments like makeup and all that going, like, yeah, I think you know that, and that's fun. As sometimes the slow burn tension stuff, like, you think you've got it because it's working on the day, but until it comes back, you know, it'll get sent. Like, you know, quite often the editor's already working on things that night or the next day, and you'll get a message back through the director, and they'll be like, yeah, like it's working, you know, things like that. It's always nice to hear that. Or, you know, and sometimes you don't get it right, so hopefully there's an opportunity to fix it, or maybe go back or rework it. You know, it's a, yeah. So yeah, to answer your question, I think most of the time you think you've got it, but you never really know. All these things you never really know until it comes out the other end. Yeah.
So it's good to get good feedback. Oona, the same question about approaching horror or approaching thrillers, which I think of the host more as a kind of a, there's horror elements to it, but I think of it more of a thriller. Are there things you do and approach how you approach a film like The Host?
I think Charlie pretty much covered all the aspects that might be different, but I think the key for me, and once again, it doesn't matter what type of film it is total immersion in the story with the director, and as you go through that pre-production period, and the film kind of takes over you, and that's where all the answers come, and that's where, when you want to be emphasize something or be scary in certain points, then all those things will come to you. It's not something you go in saying, oh, this is a horror, I'm going to shoot it like this. I think, especially with something like The Host, it literally did overtake us. The whole, the locations, the story, we were led on the path of the story. So So the answers just come to you like that. And that happens to me on any film that I do. And it's just about really listening to the director and allowing yourself to be immersed in that story.
Yeah, that's fantastic. When there's that opportunity for the set or for the location to really kind of inspire, what you're going to do and kind of motivate the direction of where you're going to be, and really become, it's almost like you become part of the story. You become as a creator, you become kind of involved in the whole, mentality, and you kind of, dive deep into it. Both of you talked about working with directors. Are there challenges or complications for working with directors where you have an idea and they have an idea, and your idea is clearly better than their idea, or vice versa, or the collaboration is fantastic, and when it works, it works. When it doesn't work, it doesn't work. How do you balance that? I'll ask. I guess, Oona, I'll start with you this time.
I think I need to think about that answer.
Can you remember particular moments in, say, for example, The Host, where there was an idea you had that wasn't necessarily the director's, or wasn't an idea that the director was approaching, that you saw as something interesting that you thought would help?
So in The Host, I had a really close relationship with Andy, the director, and we were on the same page. And so I was in a position where I made lots of suggestions that were adopted and were part of the film, which is what happens on any film when you're in a good relationship with the director. And what ended up happening is we build on each other, so you bring something and it's wonderful, and then you use it again in a different way or something like that. And that's hopefully how it is. I mean, I have worked on films where I'm completely in the opposite frame of mind with the director, and that's a real challenge and not really a lot of fun.
Sure.
But they're the director at the end of the day, so you have to get very good at negotiating, I think, and try and think 2 steps ahead of them, so that you can kind of try and put them in the position where you want them to be.
Absolutely. Charlie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I've been fortunate to have good relationships with the directors that I've shot the feature films with, and they've all got different styles. Sometimes, like something like a director like Parker on Smile and Natalie on Relic, they're both very heavy on prep, and they have a very clear vision of how things would like to be, but they're also collaborative. So with that in mind, you can work with them, and quite often best idea wins. Sometimes that's a subjective thing. Sometimes you think you've got the best idea and it doesn't win, but no, it's important. Like, I'd like to be friends with the directors first. Like, you go to war with them for a period of time, and I think there's something special about working with them more than once, and like building that up and having a shorthand with them. And if they respect you, and they usually do, because they've trusted you with this role, they're going to listen to things and take your ideas on board. You don't always get it, but yeah, I think it's a collaboration. And at the end of the day, you're there to shoot their film, so otherwise we'd be directors. But I feel like it's you have the most fun when you can have a seat at the table and have an influence on the image, for sure. That's important to me, but I also get it that sometimes they've been thinking about things for 2 years before you've had that first meeting where you're like, oh, how about this? And they're like, no, because this and that's going to lead into that. And you're like, so you have to respect that as well, that they've come often on a journey for a lot longer. So once you've caught up and you're in that world with them, if you can trade ideas and get a lot of them on screen, that's awesome. That's our job. It's like trying to make their ideas even better and more visual and all that sort of stuff. And just one other thing I'll say about that is that some directors, like I've done another film recently where the directors had come from more of a writing background, and he really just wanted to work with the actors more, and like he really trusts me with 9% of the shots. Like he'd obviously have a big influence on like yes or no, or like I love that, or maybe this, but at the end of the day, you had a lot more freedom to sort of do what you want, and I like that. But it's like they both have their pros and cons. Sometimes it's really nice to have another strong visual person with you that you can bounce ideas off, and other times when they're not as familiar with camera and movement and all the way it all operates, you can feel a little bit, you can be a little bit lonely out there. So kind of like, I hope this is working because this is really on me right now. But they both, but that can be liberating and fun as well. So
Sure.
yeah,
Sure. Yeah, it's a little bit of freedom, but you kind of want, sometimes you want a supervisor to kind of keep an eye on you, make sure you're not
sure,
doing
yeah,
something
it's a
wrong.
marathon, you know, and you're tired and like you kind of like, yeah, but yeah, so yeah, both pros and cons. Been fortunate so far. I haven't had any like, you know, I hope it doesn't happen, but like, you know, moving forward, I'm sure there'll be times where, you know, maybe you don't click as well. You just get put on a job at last minute with somebody that you haven't got a history with, and then, yeah, I don't know, that wouldn't be as fun. But so I think it's like trying to really figure out whether you're going to click with the director going in, and who knows, sometimes something might change when you're there, and you're like, oh, but yeah,
Sure.
if I could screen, if we could screen each other in a way where it's flawless, that would be great. But yeah.
So in terms of that,
there's some, sorry.
go ahead, Oona. Yes, absolutely.
Just some funny stories. I mean, I remember Gavin Finney when I just finished a film with this director that always, if I wanted to put the shot by the window, he wanted to put it against the wall, and you know, every single shot. Gavin Finney said to me afterwards, he said, you know, it doesn't matter who thinks it's their idea as long as you get your own way. And then when you speak to Seamus McGarvey and stuff, he talks about putting light stands before a rehearsal. He'll put lots of light stands, have them left in the dark bit of the room or wherever he doesn't want the shot to be, so they kind of naturally go and rehearse by the window. So they kind of manipulating things behind the scenes before, you know. So it's quite
yeah, it's a very clever psychological negotiation kind of. It's kind of,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
You're playing with someone's, you know.
It works. But, no.
But hopefully that we don't have to do that, because hopefully we're always lucky and that we're in a proper collaboration with people that, you know, then it's just a joy.
Yeah, it's you know, it's almost, you know, it's a familial relationship. It's almost, you know, when you hit a point where you're on set with a group of people who they're all thinking the same thing and they all know how everything operates, and you're, you know, it's, you know, you're, you know, it's like you're raising a family together. You're you know,
yeah,
kind of working in a house together. You're all on the same page. Yeah, like a marriage sometimes. Yeah. So in terms of the approach of, you talked about pre-production, both you talked about it. I'm always curious about going from, when I watch a film and I see a director who understands the cinematography and you know, a talented cinematographer, how much the storyboards or how storyboards played into the shots. When it was, you know, I know, for example, Spielberg is really big on storyboards, and a number of directors are big on storyboards. And some will say, hey, you know, this is how the film is going to look, and this is how it's going to be, and there is no deviation from that whatsoever. And then some have a little bit more freedom to let the cinematographer say, yeah, the storyboard was okay, but let's try it this way and let's approach this. What is your relationships, either in these films or just in general, been with storyboards as a motivating or driving factor? Charlie?
Yeah, sure. So usually my experience with storyboards, and I'm sure like there'll be lots of different experiences in the future where maybe something is boarded out in its entirety, but the main experience I have is like for sequences like where there's going to be a lot of VFX, or there's going to be prosthetics or stunts or more of a complicated sequence. The directors I've worked with would tend to lean into them then. Maybe it's also due to time and budget and stuff as to why everything isn't completely boarded out. Like I think like Parker probably would want things to be a little bit more boarded out going in. But in our case with Smile, like we only had certain scenes that were a little bit more complicated, or that really where VFX and maybe even different production design elements really needed to all be on the same page. And I find it really useful for that, because then we are all on the same page. I don't, like me personally, I'd prefer not to go in with like storyboards for everything. Just it's a personal thing. I'll respect it if that's the case, but that, you know, we need to, but I kind of like being able to have an idea of like the different shots. Like nothing wrong with the shot list or whatever, but like I love being able to be not as glued to something and maybe find something in the moment if there is time. Or if something isn't quite working you can change it up. And that's not to say you can't with storyboards, and quite often people will, but it does maybe make you a little bit more I guess an example is like I do quite a lot of commercials, and it's nearly always storyboarded because it comes through to an agency, and then it comes to the production company, and then to people like myself. And it's a little bit harder to move because you've got the agency and the client sitting there, and they know exactly what shots are on. Sure, there's often time to be able to mix things up a little bit, but you do feel like you've been given a template and you're just there to execute that. Whereas I think a lot of magic can happen on set and in the moment. So I prefer, yeah. I mean, but they can be super helpful. Like, especially if you're not quite understanding a sequence that might play out with VFX or something, and then you see it and you're like, oh, I see exactly what you're talking about now. And then, hopefully that can be a discussion beforehand where you're like, I see how it's boarded this way, but if we went left instead of right, like, how about that? And then, it can actually help a creative discussion as opposed to starting from scratch. So I don't know. I guess my experience with them is like they're valuable, but not always. And hopefully even when they are valuable, there is a little bit of flexibility, but yeah.
Oona, what are your thoughts about storyboards?
Well, much the same. I think Charlie's basically said it all. I mean, for me, storyboards are a means to break something down that seems too big for lots of people to hold at once. Maybe there might be a big stunt, there might be prosthetics, it might be a director that just needs to know that he's got the scene. Producers might want to know and have input and know what you're going to come up with because we're putting a lot of money into something. And all the different elements like prosthetics, like stunts, like understanding what our limitations are and how we can do this within a budget or something. But on the whole, for instance, on the host, we didn't have any storyboard, and we have shot lists. So depending on what that storyboard's been made for, if it's for a big stunt, for instance, you can't really, you can, of course you can deviate from anything. As long as you're getting the essence of the beats in the can, that's what counts. And hopefully with the storyboard, you'll put even more in the can, and then the editor will have even more choice and the flexibility to change it later if they find something better.
Sure.
But often it'll be because of some limit, like a stunt or something where we need to know what angle we're coming at it from because of other things that we can't show or safety or something like that. So on the host, we just had shot lists, and they could be quite vague and they can be thrown out. But once again, it's like it's even in life when there's a really big problem, you conundrum you have, often then you don't know where to start. The way to start is to break it down, and that's where a storyboard or a shot list works.
Yeah.
And then when you get there through that process, even for people that have only just come on for dailies or something, they've got that and they understand where we're at. So it puts them in a place of knowing, and then you can throw it out because you're also intimately aware of and understand the limits of what you're doing. Then you're able to spin on a dime and completely change it if something goes wrong or someone's had a better idea. So it's kind of about reassurance, understanding, we're all on the same page, connection between departments. What do you mean the left foot? We want the right foot. I thought it was a top shot, or, that kind of. Yeah. So I feel the same as Charlie. Basically, they're there as a kind of a backup, and in some cases they're essential. But usually it's on much bigger jobs, or where there's something very big on a small job, and we don't have enough money, so we have to be very careful that we've got everything, every element in the can within the day to shoot the day. Like you've only got a day to do this. Let's be really careful we get the bits we absolutely need.
So kind of transitioning off from that, you've both worked in documentary and in television and in film, in some cases music video, and some commercial work as well. I know for commercial work and for television, making the day, you're pushing, a lot more pages through a day, trying to get through, an episode or whatever in a day or two. And so the pace of work is different. Is there a preference for either of you? Is there a preference for what you enjoy more in terms of working, or is it just approaching it from different mindset. Charlie?
Sure. Feature films are definitely my preference. That's sort of why I got into this industry, like, predominantly got into this industry for. I just love film, and we can talk a bit about that if you want to know about our, how we got into it all and everything. But movies are, I just love the format. It's long enough to tell a cool story if it's done right, but you kind of get in, you get out, you get a snapshot. Like, full disclosure, I actually haven't shot any TV episodes. I've worked on, as a second AC in Melbourne and everything, I've been a part of it, but I haven't done a series yet. I would, but I think features are definitely the main passion. But that said, I do love short form projects as well, because they're good to, usually you're quite exhausted after a film. From my sort of limited experience with it, it's like, when you come out of it, you're like, don't know if I want to jump straight onto another one right now. I wouldn't mind a little reset, and commercials can be great for that. I'm not as passionate about them, but they're a good training ground. You get to use quite a lot of good tools, and you get to try new things, and I think you get quite good at being able to tell a story in a small amount of time, and you become efficient, and the crews can be great. So yeah, I do like commercials as a bit of a mixer, to do, as an in-between thing. And I do love music videos as well, but quite often they're a labor of love. I've never really done the huge ones where you can kind of, and even then they're still, from what I hear, like, they can be extremely long days and quite grueling, but they are fun because you can do whatever you want, especially if you have a bit more creative freedom, and you don't have like a big label artist. Some maybe more of a mid-tier kind of, like, that are willing to trust you a bit more, and you're mainly dealing with the band and their manager, and they're like, they love the director's work, so they're like, just do whatever you do, and that can be amazing because it's an experimental playground. And you don't necessarily have to, unless it's like a music video that has like a narrative to it. Sometimes they're more of a video art piece, and you can just try different things, and there's no rules, and there's lots of get out of jail free cards, because you might do something that doesn't quite work, but you know that you can just cut something else in, and it doesn't necessarily need to make sense. So I know it's almost like the anti-narrative in a way, where like feature films aren't like that, but so it's a good fresh thing to be able to go and do and have fun with, and maybe test a lens out on, or test some technique out on, that you could bring back to features later. So yeah, I mean, I hope that answers your question. I think features is a number one for me, but then in between that, I like doing some short form things, and
it's like a palate cleanser almost,
I think so. Yeah.
Oona, if I can ask you the same question about working in TV versus film, and some of the differences of emotion that you have approaching into it.
Yeah, and music videos and commercials. I don't really shoot commercials. I haven't really shot commercials, and that's my least favorite. I used to love working on music videos, and I've done a few as a DP, because they are so much fun. Television, I like the same. If it's a kind of a higher budget television program, then it's just the same as doing a film, really. Just more story to deal with and think about. It's very hard doing 10 pages a day on television.
Yes.
That just becomes can be sometimes really exhausting and no fun, because how do you keep that standard up, that level up, with that page count? So it can be grueling, but still really rewarding. My favorite is film. But I'm about to do a TV series that's, it's 5 pages a day, it's 5 days a week for 8 weeks, and for me that feels like a film. I can immerse myself in that just as well as I could a feature film. Right. And I'm also working on directing a documentary series that I'll shoot as well. That'll go on for quite a long time, and that's soul food. It's content that I really care about. We're just blessed to work in this industry and do what we do. Every time we go on a different job, there's a different thing driving you and getting you out of bed and happy to get out of bed every morning.
Yeah, it's never boring. It's always something. It's exciting because it's something new, and it's something, there's a new chance to work on something different. And since you brought that up, Oona, to talk about from your background, you kind of, I imagine that you kind of got introduced to this from your family. Your family, your father was a DP, was a cinematographer, and your a number of your relatives, siblings, are directors, and your brother's director, I believe. What was it like growing up in a family that was kind of in these art forms, from where you came from?
Well, it's only my brother that's in the industry, and he's really talented documentary filmmaker, by the way. And my father is still a cinematographer. I think he wouldn't like the past tense.
I'm sorry. Yes, he's still a cinematographer.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, actually, what was really interesting, my mother was a model and a very political person, and she was friends with all these Magnum photographers. So when we grew up, she was kind of pinching Cartier-Bresson photographs out of the bin in the dark rooms, and we had them hanging all over the house, and so we had all these influences of and war photographers and journalists and stuff like that, and they were very. I mean, I think times have changed a lot, but photojournalism and documentary filmmakers were really revered, and were given the budgets then to make really important stories, and my father was a documentary filmmaker for many years before he moved into feature films. So it was about giving people a voice, and it was about kind of touching people's hearts. It was a medium to do that. It was art. It feels a lot more commercial now, and they're not so interested in giving the budgets. It feels like, maybe I'm cynical. So the discussion was about the art form and how to get emotion and get story and through the lens to people, how to be kind of zen with your photography, if that makes any sense. So I mean, I wanted to be a vet, and then I found out I had to spend 7 years in university and threw that idea out. But I fell into film work by being a runner because I just needed a job when I was a teenager. And then just got bitten by the bug. I became a clapper loader, and I was being flown around the world and doing different documentaries in amazing places, and what's not to fall in love with there. So it was a really privileged experience, because even though we were poor, actually, where I lived with my mother, it was 6 kids, single mother most of the time. We had a really rich life in discussion and exposure to art and what was important in life. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that does. I'm thinking about the fact that for documentary, we mentioned before that the idea of, when you're working with a crew, you are kind of becoming invested in each other's lives as you're kind of, deep in with these people there. But for documentary, it is almost another level of becoming, these are normal, regular people who are not in film and not in things, and you're invested in them emotionally now, because you are talking about some important issue or some important content that really resonates, and now you have to it's you develop this care of now I care about people who I didn't know last year, and I'm in part of their lives.
Yeah, and this raises a really important question, and I think it's partly why Ken Loach actually started making feature films. And I've been on documentaries where the director, someone would start crying, and the director would say zoom in, because they want the shot with the tear. And you just look over your shoulder at the director, like, what kind of person are you? That like cut them open and show their grief, kind of thing. Obviously, that wasn't all the time, but so it raises a question. I mean, as a young clapper loader or camera assistant, I got to learn about lives that I never would have. The door would never have been open to, and that is really enriching and informative and informs who I am now. But But the other side of it is that if you're making a living, often through people's trauma or grief or something that's happened, there's problem in that. You know, there's hypocrisy in that, like this director wanting to zoom in on someone crying.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's why Ken Loach took the stance he has, where he can tell a story just as powerfully, and he does it in a documentary fashion. But he's not actually feeling like he's abusing someone or, you know,
yeah.
making a living off someone. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to try to, you know, have some level of, you know, a nobility in the idea, you know, otherwise you kind of drift into this idea of almost what, you know, now is reality television of, you know, can we make this melodrama out of someone's by tormenting someone's personal life, and forcing people to cry, which is not a good thing. But let me go back a little bit to, well, let me pause for a second, because I do want to show the trailers for both Smile and for the host. So if I may, I'm gonna roll these. We can start with, I guess we can start with Smile, and we can roll the trailer for this.
What is it you like to talk about?
My patient. Hi. I know you're nervous. I just want to have a chat.
I'm seeing something no one else can see except for me. It's smiling at me. Oh my God!
Yesterday, a patient in your care died brutally in front of you.
I need to find an explanation for what happened.
It's smiling at me. It's smiling at me.
You're going to die! You're going to die! You're going to die! You're going to die!
I found 20 cases involving 19 victims with a direct line linking them all together.
You said only 19. Why is it that everybody else who's seen it is dead and you're alive? I've seen it too.
You? Get away from me!
How long between each victim's death?
None of them survived longer than a week.
Rose!
Today's my 4th day. I am not gonna keep running. I have to face it.
How does it make you feel?
I'm just really scared that something bad is going to happen. Rose.
I do want to show you
It's
the trailer.
amazing.
I do have a question that's been bothering me, and we talked about this when we talked about storyboards, or we talked about working with the director. The establishing shots that are 360 pan or the spin upside down, you have shots from a lot of different weird angles. Where did that come from?
I think like Parker and we talked about it's basically essentially the protagonist Rose is like her life's falling apart, and she's you know she's becoming very mentally ill, or there's this perception of that, and we just really wanted to show different ways of purveying that. And you know, like her essentially sounds pretty basic, but her world is turning upside down, so you know, things like that. I think one of them might have even been an edit choice. There's a couple. I know the opening shot, that was something we told our drone up, like we want all these skewed angles and go upside down and just get as weird and kind of crazy as you can with like shooting. It was downtown Newark, actually, in the surrounding area in New Jersey. As for some of the others, there were edit choices, to be honest. I was like obviously involved in the discussion about how to try and, you know, get a different feeling with the drone shots, but I know one of the car ones for a fact was an edit choice. They flipped it up, in post. So I can't really, for better or worse or whatever, I'm not going to say that was a strong idea I had at the time. We shot it up right. But there is a couple though. There was definitely a couple that we knew that we were going to be traveling, and then it's not in the trailer, but like I know some of them invert, and that was a plan. But yeah, at least one of them I know was just something that, as I said earlier, like you go in with a plan and you want to capture some sort of emotion, but then the director's there with the editor and they have other ideas, and and sometimes they can make you look good or bad.
Yeah, there's some really fascinating angles that I remember from like looking at the window when she's in the hospital, looking at the window, and some of those really obscure angles that are kind of just jarring. And it really works.
Something I can speak to the people might find interesting about it is that and this is my first studio film, and the whole process, I'm not sure if you'd read or aware of this, but it was meant to be a streamer. It was just going to go to Paramount Plus when we took it on, and it tested very well, and they decided to take a theatrical, which I'm like over the moon about, and it's just really cool to see people going into the cinema, and it's that stuff's a dream come true, just like to entertain and have people come into a cinema and enjoy it, and have a lot of people talk about it being a good experience in the theater and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it wasn't meant to be. But it was actually called something else. It wasn't called Smile. And it's been really interesting seeing the marketing team and take it on and create something that can help bring people into cinemas. So in some ways, I feel like I don't want people to take this the wrong way, like I'm disappointed in the trailer or anything. It's not that at all. It's more just interesting to see that there's been a lot of comments about, I thought it was going to be about this, but then I went there and I was pleasantly surprised. Like, obviously there's elements of things like smiles and all of that sort of stuff. It's definitely there, but it is a little bit different. And when all this sort of happened and they gave away that jump scare at the end, like, and they changed the name of the film, we were all a bit like, okay, what's going on here? I think it worked because it's doing well, but that was an interesting process to go through and see something that you sign up to become a little bit different within marketing. And then, yeah, I don't know. I found that I always think about that when I watch the trailer. It's it's great. I'm not complaining at all, but it is it's been interesting to sort of see how they've taken a few elements of it and really pushed that through. I guess just learning more about the economics of it all.
Yeah,
it's been fascinating. Yeah,
a whole other world,
the whole beast. Yeah.
When you've been through the whole process and then it gets to the trailer people and they what they choose and everything, is always a bit of a surprise, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, you mentioned earlier crew jumping in fear at the monitor or something, and you also said you're not actually quite sure sometimes when you've got it. And I was thinking, if I was shooting that, I'd be pretty sure I got it. That was pretty scary trailer. Some great shots. I loved it.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
You know what's funny? It's amazing because when I saw Smile in the theater, and I knew there was going to be jump scares, and so you do this thing where you prepare yourself, and I know about composition, and I know like where there's negative space in the frame, that there's something's going to jump out of it, and I'm ready, and I'm sitting there the entire film, ready to go, waiting for it, this is going to scare. I shouldn't be scared. I know this is coming. Still, every time I fall for it. I fall for it every time, and I just jump out of my chair. And it's like it's unavoidable that it works. It works amazingly. I'm gonna I do want to show the trailer for The Host. We have the trailer for The Host queued up, and I do want to talk about this because there's some interesting ideas that I saw in this that I really liked. And so if we can show that, that'd be fantastic.
This is a very unusual and very disturbing case. Now we need to break into your thought patterns. Please tell me everything. From the beginning.
almost see the layers of its history, like a kaleidoscope. But it isn't about history or family or love or... It's about the only certainty we have in life. Impermanence.
Oh, yeah. What's that on your dress?
Ooh. I was grinding some meat. Rabbit.
Beware, even those who look innocent can be dangerous. Have they been truthful with you? Have they asked you awkward questions?
Thank you. So, Miss...
Oh, Vera Tribbe, but please, call me Vera.
Don't allow any more strangers to come here.
He can hear us.
You didn't choose your opponent wisely. But, I can help you.
Where's Robert? I know he's here.
Have a lovely stay.
Fascinating, fascinating.
Yeah.
Oona, I do want to ask you a couple questions about this film and some things that I thought were really interesting about this. There is a lot of play with color in here. There's a lot of colored lights, and the pool scene for particular is very bluish green. And there's a lot of play with light in here. How did you approach
Really
this?
atmospheric.
The wonderful thing about this film was that so the script is basically it's a remake of Psycho.
Sure. Yeah.
And so although I was encouraged not to rewatch Psycho before it, it was very clever in how you think the audience thinks they're going into one thing, but then it's another thing, and every step of the story it swivels on a dime. So this man had gotten himself into trouble with triads, and it was a very glittery, wealthy life that they were in, and Zach, the producer, was very much into that, wanting to feel that rich, lush color of the gold gambling dens and things like that. And then Mike Beckingham, who was playing the lead, Robert, I think it was called Robert. He has to go and deliver some money, and innocently walks into this seemingly innocent house, but she's the baddie. But we aren't allowed to tell our audience that yet. And the actress, Mariam Husseini, was just fantastic, because she was just played this schizophrenic person. It was just wonderful. And so with Andy's direction, and then this amazing house that we were shooting in, the textures in the house, I was just allowed to play. And so the color was actually coming into the different, showing the different aspects of her character and the warring aspect of her, because she was so pure and innocent and lovely, and then she wasn't. And so that's where the color play came into effect.
Yeah, it was really
Awesome. I want to see it. Where did you shoot? Was that in London or?
London and Amsterdam.
Cool. Yeah. I want to do a film in Europe, like the locations and the textures and the old architecture, that stairwell and everything. It's like, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, but the house was just phenomenal, and it was 70 feet deep at least.
Wow.
So there was texture everywhere, and it was full of stone statues and things. And Andy was very interested in the house was kind of the fourth wall. It was like the house was watching, so the audience were behind the house, and so that really affected our shots. the trick was is to play with that color, but no, I don't think it was in such a way that the lighting was giving away what was happening, but hopefully it was contributing to the story.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely had a different, and I agree with you. Some of the ideas of the shots you took, where there's, and I think both of you did this both in Smile and in the Relic as well, but also in this film, that you shoot through things, whether it be a window or a banister or through a door frame or a doorway, and there's a voyeuristic quality to it that us as the audience is looking at this thing, kind of barely kind of seeing what's passing by, and it kind of, you know, makes us more curious as we are kind of sneaking into this location to see what's happening.
Yeah.
It's not broad in front of us like a stage play. It's very, you know,
yeah,
we're kind of where we don't belong.
Yeah, and so I mean, when we started to do that more, so usually I mean, this is much more of a thriller or noir than obviously than Smile, which
Sure.
so we were much more lingering. The audience didn't know what was going to happen yet, and you want them to think everything's fine when he's got to that house, but as that starts to change, you start to give more negative space, or you start to have the odd shot of something that doesn't really, like, what's that for, kind of thing. And it's just, without them knowing, the audience starts to feel a little more uncomfortable. And also, it plays with the shooting through those things, that voyeuristic thing, I think also plays with the there was almost a sexual nature to it. You know, she always wore these really high heels, and in the end the guy's chained up to a table and you know, more than half naked and stuff. And so it was all playing, balancing those things out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, she does almost start off, it almost starts off flirtatious in her character.
She is. Yeah, she's flattery at him and things. Yeah.
It's a little seductive, yeah. But yeah, it worked really well. In terms of color, I do want to talk about some technical aspects, this being the cinematography panel, a little bit of nerding out. So going from, I know that I think this film was shot on film as opposed to digitally. And I know that Oona, you shot on film there. For the medium, it transitions, and this industry transitions in terms of technology, whether it be cellular to digital, whether it be, you know, the future of, you know, 3D or VR or whatever it may be coming down the pike. How do either of you stay current with, you know, there's still some things that are never going to change. There's still some things about story and things about, you know, lenses are, you know, pretty solid going forward, but there is technology changes, you know. I had to learn a couple years ago what a LUT was, you know, those kind of ideas. How do you stay ahead of the curve, basically, as this industry constantly changes of how they're delivering material?
Sure.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Sure. I just try to just treat all of this stuff like it's another tool in the toolbox or a paintbrush in the, you know, like, it doesn't really matter as much to me. I love film and I want it to always be around, and I want it to be an option. You know, I know it can be increasingly harder to convince producers, and the economics of it sometimes doesn't dictate, like, or dictates that it might be really hard to shoot on film. But what digital's offered us so much, and it's going to continue to offer so much, that I am a big fan of just embracing everything and figuring out what the best tool is for the job, and then trying to keep up to date with as much of it as possible. If a new camera comes out, like recently the Alexa 35 came out, you know, I used a commercial the other day, and it was like a great opportunity to get one and play with it. And it was great, you know, and I feel like I've got a little bit of an idea about what that camera can see and do now. And I'm very much looking forward to bringing that onto a long form at some point. There's a couple of directors I work with that only want to shoot film, and a lot of that's music videos. Like, one of them is hopefully going to have a feature next year that I can do, which would most likely be 16 mil. And I love that about him. He's just like a celluloid geek. and he loves it. And I love just testing film stocks with him and playing around in that fashion. It's just about kind of getting your hands on it and learning. You can always go to rental houses and they'll offer up, like, if you've got a relationship with them, you can go in there and test lenses and cameras and sort of play around there. And but like one thing I can talk about with Smile is, like, I'm a big fan of mixing older and new technology. Like, if you're shooting film and you're on modern LED lights with like DMX boards, and you can you have all this control, and then you mix it with something like film, I think it's an amazing outcome. You know, the flexibility you can have with lighting on film is great. With Smile, we opted to go down a large format route, and we shot on the XXII, and I can talk a little bit about why. It wasn't sort of for the sake of it. You know, I know it wasn't like a film like The Revenant or something like that, where we're up in the snow and you want to capture crazy detail in wide vistas and things like that. But what we did do is we laser printed to film and rescanned it. Photocam here in Los Angeles have a technique that we were really fortunate. We actually had our colorist David Cole is a amazing colorist that worked on Batman and Dune and films like that recently that went down that process, and we really liked it. And when we found out that Smile was going to go theatrical, we were able to sell it into Paramount, and it was just this extra element of like giving the image a little bit of life. And it wasn't about just mimicking film grain and like making it look like film. It was sort of something else. It was like bringing something older technology and merging it with new, and then to create something new, and using both to find somewhere in between that isn't going to look like you've just sort of layered a film plug-in over digital. It isn't going to look like film, but it has its own effect. Like, it's essentially gone to film, you've rescanned it, and that's what's being projected, and it just did nice things to skin and to roll off and to the color and stuff like that. And there's all these different ways that you can manipulate that. We chose to go to a very clean internegative stock because we shot on the XXII, we didn't want to then go, hey, we shot on this large clean camera and we didn't want to make it look like a gritty 35 or 16 mil image. You know, that would have been a bit sort of weird for us. We didn't really want to advertise the fact that we've gone to film. We wanted to be more of a subconscious thing, but you can, if you want, advertise the fact you've gone to film and do all these different things later and go to these different stocks and rescan. And so yeah, I just think it's amazing that we have all these tools. So yeah, I think, you know, I love mixing old and new, and then just trying to stay ahead of it. Like, there are a lot of cameras that have probably come out lately that I'm not too familiar with, but if there's something I am interested in, I just try and use it, or try and go to a place to play around with it. There's so much information online. Lenses are a huge part, as you say. Like, that's like as important as choosing a film stock or something. Like, you know, it's kind of getting a sense of what they all do. And again, music videos and even commercials, I think, are a great playground for that, because you can test them out on maybe a one-day shoot and then go, that's what they did, so maybe on the feature film I'll put them into the equation. So yeah.
Really quick, there's tell me I'm wrong, there's a vignette around Smile. It's dark on the edges. I don't.
I mean, there is sometimes, and you know what? You might have busted me on something there, because I think one of our lenses did completely cover, and I thought we took care. Look, there's definitely been some vignettes added to in the color grade and stuff too. But yeah,
it made me a color grade thing.
I need to double check that again. There was one lens that I think kind of had a little bit of a vignette, which I thought we took care of. So I don't know if it's that or whether it was like a. Yeah, do you mean the whole film? Like, just
I'm not sure. I was in an older theater. I was in like an older theater in New York, and I thought maybe it was the theater, but then I just watched the trailer again this morning, and I was like, no, it seems a little like kind of
probably a lot of that. It's interesting you say that. I mean, I've seen it a bunch of times at the theater. It never jumped out at me, especially like vignetting, like for that you get with the lens when it doesn't quite cover the sensor, or maybe the matte box doesn't quite cover it. I'm pretty sure we took care of that stuff. I would have noticed.
It seemed like it might have been a post thing. It seemed like it might have been.
Yeah, okay. I'll take that again. You know, usually you will put a vignette on the color.
The center the center is a little bit brighter than the corners of the film.
Yeah, interesting. I'll take I mean, some of that could also be has something to do with the scan as well, with how it's been.
Yeah, I was curious about that.
Yeah. I'm doing another little chat with Dave, the colorist, in a week's time. I might check in on that and watch it again beforehand and see if I can. Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Oona, in terms of, because you've worked with, you've had an opportunity to work with film, actual celluloid, and you've worked with digital as well. So tell me about the transition of well, the transition for all these new technologies that are coming out there. What the learning process for you is like, because I feel like for anybody working in production, it's always, there's something new coming out there.
I think for me, going on to digital was the thing to do is to just treat it like it's film. I still use a light meter, so that my relationships are still in the same place. And then when you do get back to film, it's not so frightening because you're still doing it the same way. And somehow I think I like that because it keeps me still in that place with my relations to my stops and things like that. It makes sense rather than pushing everything. Obviously, we can do things we couldn't do with less now. In terms of equipment and keeping on top of it, I'm not sure that I do keep on top of it. I try. I go to Camera Mage. I just was with Dado for a week doing some lighting work, demonstrations with him. What will happen is I discover something, or someone will talk about something, or I'll be on a job and discover something, and then the next job or something, it's like a seed has been planted, and then it will germinate, and the next job is, oh my God, that and this go together, and I've found some magic happening. So with Jacob Bellinger's CLRS reflective light system, I'm completely enough with that now. And then with Dado recently, I was getting his parallel beam reflectors on the lamp. So it's all about these different ways that I can light things more efficiently and that give me the textures I love, because I still do have problems with lots of LED light, I'm afraid. But so yeah, it's a constant stream of information and people having wonderful ideas and amazing equipment. And so what I think happens is that stuff that's pertinent to you sticks, or you go on a journey to solve an issue or find a resolution for something you've got on a particular job, and then the dots start to connect. Was that and it grows into something bigger.
Yeah. Not necessarily a horror film, or not even, I guess not even a thriller, but Lola, can you talk just for a moment about how Lola was shot? Because it is...
it's just a cinematographer's dream. It's just a complete dream.
Yeah, it seemed like it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lockdown film, and the director's crazy about film, and it was set in the 40s, and I happen to have been a long time friend of Joe Dunton, so I had to come up with all these real cameras that were from that period, or as old as I could, and we shot it on 16 and 35, and so I had 7 cameras, and one of them was Stanley Kubrick's Ewan Sinclair, the Clockwork camera, and the director had an old Bolex Clockwork camera. We had a BL4, an REST, some others. There's too many. And so what can I tell you? So lockdown, we had to send the negative from Ireland to London in COVID times, wait however long it took to get some rushes back. It was very difficult to be able to project them, and we were using lenses where practically the elements were like wiggling around inside them. But it was heaven, because so the premise was that the film had been found in cans in a basement.
Yeah,
that's how the film opens, with the title saying this film has been found in the basement, and it's thought to be from the 40s. So I had to flash the stock while we were shooting. I was opening and shutting the door. The loader and myself were scratching the film and jumping up and down on it in the bathroom of the place I was staying. The director was cooking some of it developing some of it, and the producers were trusting us enough to do this. We could have had to reshoot. You know, how much do you cook an egg before it's unusable?
I was
So we had
about to say, like,
reticulation.
it is so, that is a cinematographer's dream. And I just wanted to say quickly that I have so much respect for teams that are down for that. Like, there's still money at stake and everything like that. It's so refreshing to hear that there are producers out there, and there's people, like, when people can get behind something like that and go, you know what, let's be bold. You know, let's not worry about shipping the film during a pandemic, and let's not worry about cooking and everything. That is a dream. Like, I love that. That's sort of why we get into this stuff. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to say that sounds amazing, and credit to the team for being like, yeah, let's how we're going to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's like, it's almost like a history lesson on film. You know, it's basically a history lesson with all those cameras. It's kind of a historical perspective of kind of how film is made and doing.
And we had ancient lamps that were being revived. We had ancient equipment that was being revived, and metal files on them, trying to make things fit. But I mean, the director Andrew Legg, he said to me in my interview, he said, if we don't go for it, this won't work. So and there's a bit, well, great, but what are the producers on board with it? Kind of like, how much can I fog the film and stuff? And the producers completely behind him, 100%. It was just a dream. And the story, he's a brilliant writer. He wrote it as well.
Yeah.
And that was his first feature film, and I just really look forward to more, because he's someone who really has a lot to say and has a huge heart in what he has to say. So he's someone to watch for sure.
Cool.
So were reshoots necessary?
No. There was one shot where he said I got a bit carried away opening the door, but we'd already had earlier takes. Okay, though, it was a bit too much. I think that's the only one I heard. I just like getting into opening and shutting the door, and it was just beautiful, and you're seeing the white of the flashing kind of doing this on the frame.
Yeah.
Or where we were scratching. We were literally, the loader and I would like throwing rolls of film on the floor and jumping on them and smacking them and trying to make sparkle and things like that. So it's everything that as a loader I was taught not to do. We were doing.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
It's like a horror film in production of, all the mistakes that could possibly go wrong.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to sound like none of this was done with care. It was that we were actually really careful. We did a lot of testing. And so it was, how much can we fog it, and how much, can we scratch it and things while it's still usable and stuff. The only thing that wasn't really, I think, tested, but Andrew was very experienced in cooking eggs, was the cooking of the leg. I mean, reticulation, we knew what that looked like, so it didn't matter how much he cooked it, if that makes sense, because we knew. And actually, funnily enough, with all the cameras and the old lenses that we had, the one that became the hero, the one that we loved, was the lens on his Bolex.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That became our hero that we tried to kind of emulate with everything else.
It's you can make an analogy between, the differences between shooting in a studio and shooting on location, in that, location provides things that you would never get in a studio. There's just sometimes, you talked about the architecture in London. There's things you would never get in a studio. With these old cameras, there's some things that, modern technology and processing and plugins and filters and effects, you just can't. It's almost like you can't replicate the look of an old Bolex. And some of these old cooking and eggs and stuff, these old process, it just looks, it's unimitatable.
You should have seen the focus pullers' faces though when they went into prep. It's hilarious. Because lots of the crew now, they've not seen these cameras. They don't, we actually found crew that did know film cameras, but still, these are like major antiques, right?
In terms of, I wanted to ask Charlie, I want you to a question about I thought it was interesting in Smile and in Relic towards the end, not to give any spoilers away, but in Smile and Relic towards the end, in both circumstances, you take advantage of this technique of using what seems like, and I'm sure there's more, but what seems like a single light source. In Relic, it's the It's the flashlight. In Smile, there's the oil lamp that she's carrying around. How do you pull that off? How do you pull that off and manage that amount of light?
Various degrees of success and fear. I don't know. I mean, yeah, no, good question. I mean, usually you just lean into, I mean, that is one of the benefits of digital sensors, like, you know, and as much like, you know, as I said, I love it all. And like, I hope to do films on film in the future and like, and all that sort of stuff, but you can push these cameras a little bit further with things like that. That said, there's still a way to do it on film. People always did, you know, but I do find that you can kind of start with the basic source, whether it is just a flashlight or a lantern, and really kind of go from there, whether the lantern might be like a double wick thing. In this case of Smile, we weren't really allowed to have fire in the lantern, and that was going to heat up and be dangerous. So it is like, it's, you know, LEDs are doing it, and in Relic, you know, it's flashlights and things like that. But generally you lean into that source, but then, all right, so something I did in Relic, which I remember, you know, to get a little bit more fill light on Emily and Bella, we're walking around and I'm handheld with them in the corridors. There's three light sources. Well, there's two light sources and a little technique I found quite useful. There's the flashlight. We did have some overhead ambient lights rigged up above, just very muted. And that I think that if you can do that and you find a base and then you come in on top of that, then it's really helpful, because then you've got a bit of control to see a little bit more depth. You can always bring it up and down later in the grade, but I think it's important to like have something else there, unless being pitch black is like what the story dictates. But it's generally just building a little bit of a base, coming in with the light source that they're usually like that they're holding in the case of both of these films. But then, yeah, something I did in Relic was I wore like a white sheet around my body, because then they're getting quite close, and they would shine the flashlight around and it would come across the white sheet and bounce back off them. And that's quite a technique used quite a bit. Like people might, like, it's depending on what the shot is, you know, it's been pretty common that people will put beadboards or, you know, silver reflection or gold reflection, whatever it is that they can kind of shine towards, and then it'll bounce back. And I think even if they're into complete darkness, but they're walking in and out of that, so it doesn't have to be consistent. But I found that quite useful. Yeah, and then in Smile, we were just following little flickering tubes around with us, like fire tubes. So when Rose was walking around in that location, we would have, like, you know, someone from our G&E to, like, you know, our gaffer Joel did a great job with this, and quite often the best boy would be just walking around, and it'd take a bit of time, you know, like we'd have to really figure it out, like where the lantern was going to be and when, because we wanted it to be kind of natural as much as possible. I don't feel like we got it always right, but like there are, for the most part, you know, if she's holding the lantern up, we've got someone off camera like holding this flashlight up and just trying to mimic what it's doing to get a little bit more, because that light source wasn't enough to get an image. So yeah, I guess it's just with testing came into it. Both of these films we didn't have a huge amount of time to test, so you are kind of like, you know, you kind of going in a little, you know, with some ideas that you just hope they work. And yeah, I think that was kind of, again, with Smile, we built in a little bit of ambience as well here and there. There's a bit of moonlight creaking in. We did the house at the end, there is some windows, so we wanted to, like, you know, in the background of shots, like if there was just a little bit of that kind of greeny blue moonlight seeping in, it just helps separate, you know, with separation and things like that. But yeah, it's funny, they both of those films actually have similar kind of third acts in a way, where things get extremely dark and you have the characters with a one light source. It's funny how that kind of played out that way.
Yeah. So in terms of that, for both the host and for Relic and Smile and for these other films, there is this nature of trying to have, you know, and I think for Smile particularly, it starts out relatively, you know, there's a lot of daytime scenes. There's a lot of, you know, suburban happy, you know, and then it drifts towards darker and darker and darker and darker. Whereas other horror films would be dark the entire time. How do you balance that in terms of, there will be points at which this is too dark. Yeah, this might work in a theater, this might work on a fantastic projector in a theater, but when this goes to video and this goes to TV, it'll just be pitch black and no one will see anything for the next 4 minutes. Is there a point at which you pull back from that, where you say, certain scenes are just, we're doing this, it's just not working?
Is that one for me?
Sure.
Sorry, I can. Something that comes to mind with Relic in particular. You live and you learn on a lot of things, and again, I don't think you get it all right. Like for the most part, as you say, if you watch that on a good television or at the theater, and I think I'm really happy with it. There are some scenes that we definitely leaned into the darkness quite a lot, and I think it's still watchable in a television, like in a regular environment. But when that film came out, it was the heat of the pandemic, the middle, here in Los Angeles, we all had a stay-at-home order, and there was a big revival of going to the drive-in, and that was amazing. Like we were very disappointed that obviously cinemas closed up. It was going to get a small theatrical release, I believe, and but then obviously everything shut down. So we were really happy to see that it was going to drive-ins, and I was super excited to go and see it at a drive-in. And I went here in Los Angeles, and it was just like, I wanted to kind of give everyone their money back. I felt guilty. I felt like, here, I'm sorry about that. There's all these people, the economy's shut down and they're all trying to get a bit of reprieve and go to a movie.
Sure.
And yet there was light pollution on the screen. There was a full moon that night. There was this old sodium vapor light at a warehouse next door to the drive-in leaking onto the screen. I don't know whether it matters that much. People just wanted to get out of their house and everything. But no, you're right. Like it was, story beats were lost because it's dark, and in that environment, it didn't work. That's the reality. I stand by that. And most people were cool about it, though. I was actually kind of intrigued about how people were talking about it, and there was a lot. So I'd look at some comments going, "Yeah, I went to see Relic at the drive-in, but I have to see." Instead of saying it was horrible, I couldn't stand it, and a lot of them were like, "I think I need to watch it again because I missed some." So people were quite like,
sure.
They understood. Most of 99% of them understood they were at a drive-in and it was a horror film and there wasn't really the environment for it. If we had known, we probably would have been able to do a grade for it, much like you do grades for different formats. You have your theatrical, you have your 709 television kind of grade, you have your Dolby now and HDR grades. I think, we could have done something for the drive-in, but we didn't know. It was all just a quick thing. They pivoted that way. So yeah, you're right. Finding a balance is important. I think moving forward, I've got a little bit more experience now with thinking ahead of building in maybe a little bit of a buffer. If you're shooting digital, like you mentioned LUTs before, LUTs become an important tool for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things that you can do is maybe have your colors build in a little bit of a base, like a half stop or a full stop of exposure there. So you're essentially overexposing on set, but no one knows, doesn't look like it. And you can come back to a little bit of a get out of jail, you lost a bit too much there. And you can go back to the file and there's actually a stop more of light, which might sort of save you. I think moving forward, I will play with that a little bit if it's a very dark film. That said, I just like you want to be bold in that too. And I think hearing what Oona did with Lola, that's amazing to me. I think approaching a film like that is awesome as well. Just owning it and going in with an approach, and I think the results are usually going to be amazing if everyone's on the same page and you go for it. I think being bold is important. So I don't want to approach things and be too conservative with we need to save a bit of light there, we need to do a bit there. It's a balance. Because otherwise I think things could end up being quite boring if you just be really safe.
Sure, absolutely.
And then people get used to that too. They get used to seeing safe. So then you come back into the color later and you want to be a bit more bold, and people can get a bit nervous about that too. So then that causes more discussions and everything. I think if you're just upfront from the start and you're no, it's going to be dark and this is how we're going to play it. Yeah. One more thing I'll just say quickly though is I think with what could have helped even at the drive-in with something like Relic and some of the dark scenes there is just having a little bit more of a point of contrast. Coming in with a little bit more of a harder light source somewhere, and that your eye can get drawn to. It's a little bit more forgiving then for everything to be dark, whether it's just little things you learn, and it's always going to be different. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's funny that you brought that question. Speaks to me a lot because I was kind of close to that result during that period, and I was a bit okay, cool, it's interesting stuff.
It gets tricky. We have in my home we have blankets over the windows because the curtains just don't make it dark enough. And if we watch anything if we watch a scary movie during the afternoon,
it's really hard. Yeah, it's the same in here too. I got the TV here with all these windows and stuff, and I don't even have proper blinds for them, so I don't really try not to watch too much during the day. It's hard. You really do need to,
and
pull lights off and embrace it. Yeah,
it's tricky. Oona, the same idea. In doing these films, are there points at which you know that the brightness, or you're trying to do something moody, or you're trying to do something dark, and it's just too much, and it's not hitting right?
No. Charlie touched on it for me. You can't have black without having some energy in there, some white, some silver. And for me, if you don't have that hot spot, that energy, it's just murk, and that doesn't excite me. Now, sometimes you have to embrace that. But that murk would be the highest top. It wouldn't be in a place where you couldn't see what was happening. But that's not what excites me. So the best example that comes to mind is, Darius Khondji in Seven. Morgan Freeman's in a corridor, and it's pitch black, but there's a little bit of reflection somewhere, or there'll be a bit of light on a cheekbone or something, and it'll be a white and black, and that's what does it. And so in the host, in the cellar, actually, there were a lot of reasons why I had to hide the set, and we followed the actors around with a tube, because I wanted it to be black and silver, but a green silver, and that gave us the energy of both that high contrast, right? And became kind of quite sexy in a way. But what Charlie's talking about, what happened to him in the drive-through, this happens. You can go to some obscure theater in the middle of the backwoods, and they don't know what they're doing, and your film's not being projected the way that you shot it, right? So if it's in the negative, then, and you can't control what happens in screenings in different places where, theoretically that projectionist in the drive-through should have cranked up that light so that it was able to be visible with all the pollution and everything. But you can't. I mean, one screening I was at recently of a film I did, the emergency exit lights were so bright they were making light pollution. It's really upsetting. It's you want to go around with a roll of ND and kind of ND them all before the film starts. So I think that's what gets me moving anyway, or what gets me excited when I'm behind the eyepiece, is when I have that contrast. It can be a tiny little bit, but then the blacks go black, and then it looks sexy, and then I'm excited and I'm happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing that you do all this work and you make all this effort, and you try to make it perfect, and then bad theater can just even if it's sound, I keep going to theaters where there's a questionable sound, and I'm like, oh, this is not working because there's or there's a scratch on the screen or something, and there's a a stain on the screen, and all of a sudden I just saw a movie the other day, and I was like, is that in the film, or is that no? That's the stain on the screen. Okay, step away.
I was at a screening. It was a year or so ago, and it was on film, and you could tell that whoever was projecting it wasn't experienced, and I happened to be with a lot of elderly cameramen, and they were all bowling up to the projection room and trying to get in so that they could reset the projector. It's great. It's fantastic. Trying to tell the projectionist how look, that's out of focus, and this is wrong, and that's wrong, and the gate's incorrectly, and it's great.
That's awesome.
I want to end with one more question, and this is kind of outside of the topic, not really outside the topic, but more in the theme there. And this is kind of a wild card. In terms of film, maybe in terms of ideas approaching, since we are approaching Halloween, and since we are talking about scary movies, what scares you? In terms of film, but maybe in just terms of story. I know you're gonna have to challenge yourself to come up with an idea. What do you know that you say this is going to be scary in terms of things you're experiencing in terms of story? Charlie?
Yeah, I think I know what you're asking, and I can speak to it. It actually is quite easy because both of the horror films I've done recently are about mental illness and sickness and losing your mind, and that scares me. So I can, like, in both of these cases, one is like a metaphor for dementia and Alzheimer's, and another is a bit more of a metaphor for trauma and intergenerational kind of trauma and things like that. So both of those things are scary, especially the first one, you know, because I've experienced that within my own family. And Natalie Erica James, the director, also, it was an influence from things she'd gone through as well. So the horror's there, and I think that it's kind of easy to take on something like that when it has a real human feel to it. Like, you know, there are a lot of horrors out there, and I love it all. I love like all genres and everything, and I can get behind a slasher if it's just for the sake of like it. But, you know, if it's just about some psychopath for no particular reason running around and it's like gore porn, like, cool, like maybe I'd be into shooting something like that. But I'm more into doing horror that has more of a human element to it. And yeah, in both of these cases, they were both terrifying things for me. So it was kind of easier to kind of get behind them. But is that sort of what you meant? Was it more of the thematic stuff? Or, yeah, cool.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, it's interesting you say that, because in terms of Relic, I thought about it when I was watching Relic. We got through like 2/3 of the film. And I said, you know, if there's not a horror element to this, this could just be a family drama. You know, this could just be a family, you know, mental illness, you know, which seems like Alzheimer's, you know, based drama. If you take the horror elements out of it and just make it there, that it could have just been that, and you're right that there's a scary element to that, because it's, you know, it's that fine line between real and fantastical when you go into the horror elements of it. So no, sure. But I figured while we're here on the theme of scary, you know, it should be the creators who are thinking about what scares them as well. Oona, what do you think? Do you think of anything that scares you?
There was a trailer I saw the other day that my whole heart sunk, and I was like, no, I'm not watching that. And I can't remember what it was. I've already wiped it out of my mind. But I think it's something about mental illness, something about not knowing. I think the lead in the film was being kind of played or something, made to believe that something was real that wasn't, or something like that. So it must be along the lines of mental illness. I'm sorry, I can't really remember which one it was.
Yeah. There's definitely some things. There's things that I didn't know that scare me sometimes that I discover. And film is, you know, film and horror film and thrillers like this are a way to teach you about yourself, kind of, in some circumstances, about what, you know, I didn't realize I held on to this because of some life experience that like bothered me. And so those kind of things will get to you. I want to thank you both extremely much for being here and taking some time in your day. I know some of you are in other time zones, and there's some challenging to do this via Zoom, but I appreciate you being here. It's both been fantastic and enlightening, and I feel like I've learned a lot, and I think that's the most important thing. So thank you both, Charlie and Oona. Again, this is Charlie Sarroff and Oona Menges for Sight, Sound, and Story, and we'll continue on with future events and future programming. So take care, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
We all hope you had a frightfully good time with Charlie, Oona, and Chad, to whom I owe a debt of thanks, as well as our sponsors, AJA, OWC, Zeiss, and Filmmaker U. Also, Janet Dalton and Jason Banky from Manhattan Knitted Workshop, who understand that my intro and outro tonight is not as funny as I think, but allowed me to put it in anyway. Good night.